The day began like any other for Maya Evans, an accomplished detective in her early 30s, known in her precinct for her sharp instincts and unshakable resolve. Off-duty and dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, she was looking forward to a rare moment of peace. She had spent the morning running errands and was now stopping by a local coffee shop to grab a quick pick-me-up before heading home. It was a crisp, sunny day, the kind where the town streets buzzed with activity. Children laughed as they raced their bikes, shop owners chatted with regulars, and cars lined up neatly in the bustling parking lot of the shopping district. Maya pulled into a space near the entrance of the coffee shop, her mind already wandering to the fresh cup of her favorite brew. She glanced at her watch, it was just after noon. The day still held promise. Grabbing her purse, she stepped out of her car and locked it with a reassuring beep. The lot was lively but ordinary, the kind of place where nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. As she approached the entrance, she caught the distinct sound of a police car pulling up behind her. The sharp screech of tires and the sudden blip of a siren startled her. Maya turned to see a patrol vehicle stopping just a few feet from her car. Out stepped Officer Greg Stanton, a tall, stocky man in his late 40s with a perpetually stern expression etched into his face. At first, Maya thought nothing of it. Officers frequently stopped by this part of town for coffee or lunch. But Stanton's gaze locked onto her with an intensity that immediately set her on edge. His eyes darted from her to her car, then back to her, as if piecing together a puzzle only he could see. He began walking toward her with a swagger that screamed authority. "You there," he called out, his voice gruff and commanding. Maya turned fully to face him, confused but composed. "Yes, officer. Is something wrong?" Stanton didn't answer right away. Instead, he circled her car, inspecting it as though it were a crime scene. Finally, he straightened up and pointed at her. "This car. Is it yours?" The question caught Maya off guard. "Yes, it is." "Why do you ask?" she replied, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. Stanton's expression hardened. "I've received reports about a vehicle matching this description being involved in suspicious activity. I need to see your ID and proof of ownership." Maya's brow furrowed. "Suspicious activity? That's strange. This car hasn't been anywhere unusual." "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again," Stanton interrupted, his tone sharp. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the sight of a police officer confronting a woman in broad daylight. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Maya felt the weight of their stares and the judgment hanging in the air. "Of course," Maya said, reaching into her purse to retrieve her wallet. She handed him her ID and the car's registration without protest, hoping to defuse the situation quickly. Stanton examined the documents, his eyes narrowing. "This is a nice car for someone like you," he muttered, loud enough for Maya to hear. She froze, the words hitting her like a slap. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with incredulity. "I said," Stanton repeated, "this car doesn't exactly scream everyday citizen. You sure you didn't borrow it from someone?" Maya's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her composure. "Officer, I'm not sure what you're implying, but this car is mine, and the documents prove it. Now, is there anything else I can help you with?" Instead of answering, Stanton took a step closer, his hand hovering near his holster. "Don't get smart with me," he warned. "Step away from the vehicle." The tension in the air was palpable. The crowd had grown larger, phones now raised to record the unfolding drama. Maya glanced at the faces around her, some curious, others concerned, a few openly skeptical of her innocence. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her calm. "Officer, I've given you everything you asked for. What more do you need?" she asked, her voice firm but respectful. Stanton's lips curled into a smirk. "I'll decide when I've got everything I need." Then, without warning, he reached for her wrist and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You're coming with me for further questioning." Gasps erupted from the crowd. "Are you serious?" Maya exclaimed, pulling her hand back instinctively. "On what grounds?" Resisting an officer's investigation, Stanton replied smugly. The absurdity of the accusation hit Maya like a freight train. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she had to decide, right now, how to handle it. Should she reveal who she was and risk escalating Stanton's fragile ego, or should she comply and hope the truth would come out later? As Stanton reached for her again, a small voice from the crowd broke through the tension. "Hey, I know her. She's that detective who came to our school last month." All eyes turned to the source of the voice, a young boy clutching his mother's hand. Maya's heart sank. The boy's innocent declaration had put her identity in jeopardy, and now there was no turning back. Stanton froze, his grip faltering for a split second before he tightened it again. "Detective," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. Maya met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Yes, Detective Maya Evans. And I suggest you call your supervisor immediately." The crowd murmured in astonishment, their phones still recording every second. Stanton's face turned an alarming shade of red, but he didn't release her. Instead, he stared at her as if trying to piece together a puzzle that had suddenly become too complex. For Maya, the moment was far from over. She could feel the weight of every decision she had made in her career bearing down on her. But one thing was clear, this confrontation was about to take a turn no one in that parking lot would ever forget. Maya Evans had always been someone who believed in fairness and justice. Her journey to becoming a detective wasn't one paved with privilege or shortcuts. Growing up in the working-class part of town, she had faced her share of adversity. Her parents had worked tirelessly to provide for her and her two younger brothers, instilling in her the values of hard work, resilience, and integrity. From an early age, Maya knew she wanted to protect and serve her community, to be a force for good in a world that often seemed chaotic and unfair. But the path to her dream had been anything but smooth. As a young black woman entering law enforcement, Maya had quickly learned that the badge didn't always come with respect. In the academy, she had to work twice as hard to prove herself among peers who doubted her capabilities. Some saw her as a token hire, a box checked for diversity. Others openly dismissed her, believing she lacked the toughness needed for the job. But Maya had never been one to back down. She graduated at the top of her class, earning accolades for her keen analytical mind and exceptional problem-solving skills. When she joined the force, her work ethic and dedication earned her the attention of higher-ups, and she was fast-tracked into detective work. Over the years, Maya had cracked cases that left even the most seasoned officers impressed. Yet, despite her accomplishments, she couldn't ignore the subtle, and sometimes blatant, biases that lingered in the department. There were the side comments, the second-guessing of her decisions, and the occasional outright undermining of her authority. Maya handled it all with a calm determination, letting her results speak louder than words. One of her proudest moments came when she initiated a community outreach program aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and the town's underserved neighborhoods. Maya knew firsthand the mistrust many residents felt toward the police, and she was determined to change that. She organized school visits, hosted workshops, and worked tirelessly to show that not all officers wore the same face of prejudice. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. She became a familiar face in the community, a beacon of hope for those who had long felt overlooked. But for every success, there were challenges. Officer Greg Stanton was one of them. Stanton had been with the department for over 2 decades, and his reputation was a topic of hushed conversations among his colleagues. He was known for his abrasive demeanor, a cop who saw the world in black and white, often to the detriment of those he served. Stanton had never warmed to Maya, often dismissing her ideas in meetings or making sarcastic remarks about her idealistic approach to policing. What many didn't know was the depth of Stanton's resentment. To him, officers like Maya represented a shift he didn't like, a move toward accountability and transparency that he felt undermined the old-school ways. Over time, his disdain for her grew into something more personal, though he rarely had the opportunity to confront her directly. Back in the parking lot, the confrontation playing out between Maya and Stanton was becoming a spectacle. As she stood handcuffed, her mind raced. She thought of her parents, who had always been so proud of her achievements. She thought of the young girl she once was, dreaming of making a difference. Most of all, she thought of the people watching, recording, and judging her in this moment. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone who had ever been mistreated, underestimated, or silenced. Stanton, on the other hand, was grappling with his own thoughts. The mention of Maya being a detective had thrown him off balance, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. He was convinced she was bluffing, that this was some elaborate act to avoid consequences. In his mind, there was no way someone like her, dressed casually, driving a car he deemed too nice, could be telling the truth. The crowd continued to grow, and the murmurs became louder. A woman in her late 40s, standing near the edge of the group, shook her head in disbelief. "Isn't that the lady who helped my niece after the break-in?" she whispered to a man beside her. Others began sharing similar stories, piecing together the realization that Maya wasn't just another citizen, she was someone who had made a difference in their lives. Maya remained silent as Stanton spoke into his radio, calling for backup. Her instincts told her that revealing too much too soon could escalate the situation. She needed to bide her time, to let the weight of his actions sink in before she played her hand. But the strain was beginning to show. Her wrists ached from the cuffs, and the humiliation of being paraded in front of the crowd gnawed at her. A young woman stepped forward, phone in hand, and called out, "Officer, why are you arresting her? She hasn't done anything wrong." Stanton shot her a glare. "Step back, ma'am. This is a police matter." "It's a public matter now," the woman retorted. "You can't treat people like this and expect us to stay quiet." Stanton's jaw tightened. He hated feeling outnumbered, especially by a crowd that seemed to be turning against him. His backup arrived moments later, 2 additional patrol officers who looked visibly uncomfortable as they assessed the scene. Stanton motioned them over and began explaining the situation, clearly downplaying Maya's claims of being a detective. Maya watched them carefully, noting the hesitation in their expressions. They knew her, or at least they knew of her. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the dawning realization that Stanton might be making a grave mistake. But neither officer spoke up, choosing instead to defer to Stanton's authority. As the minutes dragged on, the tension reached a boiling point. The crowd's murmurs turned into shouts of frustration, demanding answers and calling out Stanton's behavior. Maya felt a flicker of hope. The community she had worked so hard to support was standing up for her, refusing to let her be silenced. Finally, Maya decided it was time. She straightened her posture, her voice calm but commanding. "Officer Stanton, I strongly suggest you remove these handcuffs and call your supervisor before this situation escalates further." Stanton sneered. "And why should I do that?" Maya met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "Because I'm Detective Maya Evans, badge number 413, and you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on Stanton as the color drained from his face. One of the backup officers immediately stepped forward, fumbling for his radio to verify her identity. Stanton's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. For Maya, this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a test of everything she believed in. And as the weight of her words began to sink in, she knew the real echo. The silence that followed Maya's revelation was heavy, a tense pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Stanton stood frozen, his hand still gripping the handcuffs that bound her wrists. His face betrayed a mix of disbelief and defiance, as though his mind was racing to come up with an explanation that would salvage his authority. Around them, the crowd leaned in, phones still raised, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. One of the backup officers, a young man named Officer Bennett, finally broke the silence. He had been on the force for just over a year and had heard of Detective Maya Evans, the department's rising star, known for her sharp instincts and commitment to justice. As he stepped forward, his voice wavered slightly, but his words were clear. "Detective Evans? Is that true?" Maya turned her gaze to Bennett, her calm demeanor never wavering. "Yes, Officer Bennett. Badge number 413. I suggest you confirm my identity with dispatch immediately." Bennett hesitated, glancing nervously at Stanton. It was clear he was torn between his duty to follow procedure and his fear of undermining a senior officer in front of an audience. But the weight of the situation was impossible to ignore. With a reluctant nod, he pulled out his radio and stepped aside to make the call. Stanton, meanwhile, was struggling to regain control of the situation. "Don't listen to her," he barked, his voice laced with frustration. "She's trying to manipulate you. People impersonate law enforcement all the time. Maining was just beginning. You can't just take her word for it." Maya's lips curled into a faint, ironic smile. "If you believe I'm impersonating an officer, then you're obligated to follow protocol and verify my credentials. Or are you suggesting we ignore department procedures when it's inconvenient?" The crowd murmured in agreement, their frustration with Stanton's behavior growing by the second. A woman near the front, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, shouted, "Why don't you just check her badge? What are you afraid of?" Stanton shot her a glare but said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. He was cornered, and everyone could see it. The situation was slipping further and further out of his control, and no amount of bluster could change that. As the moments ticked by, the tension in the air grew thicker. The crowd's mood shifted from curiosity to anger, their murmurs turning into shouts of outrage. "Let her go," someone yelled. "You're making a fool of yourself." Stanton turned his back on the crowd, focusing all his attention on Maya. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he muttered under his breath, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You think this is going to end with you walking away clean?" Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "I think this is going to end with the truth coming out. The only question is how much damage you're going to do to yourself before that happens." Before Stanton could respond, Officer Bennett returned, his face pale but resolute. "Detective Evans' credentials have been confirmed by dispatch," he announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "She is who she says she is." The words landed like a bombshell. The crowd erupted into a mixture of cheers and shouts, their anger now fully directed at Stanton. "You messed up," someone yelled. "She's a detective, and you treated her like a criminal." Stanton's face flushed a deep crimson. His grip on the handcuffs tightened for a moment before he finally, reluctantly, released them. Maya rubbed her wrists, the faint red marks a silent testament to the ordeal she had just endured. For a brief moment, she stood in place, staring at Stanton with a calm intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge, holding it up for everyone to see. The crowd fell silent again, their eyes fixed on the small, gleaming object that symbolized authority, responsibility, and justice. "I don't need to tell you what this means," Maya said, her voice steady but firm. "But I will say this, the badge you wear is not a license to abuse your power. It's a responsibility, a commitment to protect and serve, not to harass and intimidate. You've forgotten that, Officer Stanton. And now, everyone here knows it." The words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. Stanton opened his mouth to respond but found himself unable to speak. The truth of Maya's statement was inescapable, and for the first time, he seemed to realize the full extent of what he had done. The backup officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Finally, Officer Bennett stepped forward again, addressing Maya directly. "Detective Evans, on behalf of the department, I'd like to apologize for." Maya held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "It's not your apology to make," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows behavior like this to go unchecked. If we're serious about change, we need to start holding people accountable, no matter who they are." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices filled with a mixture of admiration and relief. Maya turned to face them, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you all for standing up and speaking out. It means more than you know. But let's remember, this isn't just about one incident. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with the energy of what they had witnessed, Maya turned her attention back to Stanton. He stood silently, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. "I suggest you take some time to reflect on today," she said quietly. "Because the next time you cross the line, the consequences will be far more serious." With that, Maya walked away, her steps steady and purposeful. She didn't look back, even as the weight of the day settled heavily on her shoulders. She knew this was far from over. Stanton's actions would spark investigations, conversations, and debates, both within the department and in the community. But for now, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had stood her ground, spoken her truth, and shown the world what justice truly looked like. And as she stepped into her car and drove away, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the start of something bigger. In the days that followed the incident, the video footage captured by dozens of bystanders quickly went viral. Social media exploded with outrage, praise, and debates, as the clip of Detective Maya Evans confronting Officer Stanton became a rallying cry for those demanding accountability in law enforcement. The hashtags #JusticeWithMaya and #ReckoningForStanton trended for days, pulling national attention to the small town's police department. Maya, however, was not on social media. She spent those first days focused on the internal fallout of what had transpired. The department had no choice but to launch an internal investigation into Stanton's actions, and Maya was called in to give a detailed statement. She recounted every moment of the encounter with the same precision she applied to her detective work, refusing to omit or soften any detail. The police chief, a middle-aged man named Charles Mercer, was deeply conflicted. Mercer had always respected Maya's work ethic and results, but he also knew that the department's reputation was on the line. Privately, he admired her courage in standing up to Stanton, but publicly, he had to tread carefully. The growing scrutiny from the media and the community left no room for mistakes. "Detective Evans," Mercer said during one of their meetings, his voice measured, "I want you to know that your concerns are being taken seriously. But I also need you to understand that the department is under a lot of pressure right now." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "With all due respect, Chief, this isn't just about pressure. It's about accountability. Officer Stanton's behavior wasn't an isolated incident, it's a symptom of a deeper problem. Ignoring it won't make it go away." Mercer sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I know. And we'll do what we can. But you have to understand, this kind of change doesn't happen overnight." Maya nodded, though inwardly, she felt a familiar frustration. Change might not happen overnight, but how long would it take? How many more incidents like hers would it take before people stopped making excuses and started demanding real reform? Meanwhile, Stanton had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. For the first time in his career, the weight of his actions was catching up to him. Stanton had never been one to reflect on his behavior, he had always seen himself as a no-nonsense officer, someone who got the job done, no matter the cost. But the flood of backlash, both from the community and within the department, forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth: his way of doing things was no longer acceptable. The media descended on the town like a storm, amplifying the tension between the police department and the community. Journalists camped outside the precinct, eager for sound bites and interviews. Community leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss the incident and broader issues of police misconduct. Activists demanded transparency and systemic changes, while others defended the department, claiming the backlash was an overreaction. For Maya, navigating the aftermath was both exhausting and empowering. She attended several town halls, listening to residents share their stories of mistreatment and fear. Many of them approached her afterward, thanking her for standing up and becoming a symbol of hope. One evening, a young boy no older than 10 approached her after a meeting, clutching a handwritten note. "Are you Detective Evans?" he asked shyly. Maya crouched down to his level, smiling warmly. "That's me. What's your name?" "Marcus," he replied, holding out the note. "My mom said you're really brave. She said I should give this to you." Maya unfolded the note and read it, her heart swelling with emotion. The letter was simple but heartfelt, thanking her for showing the world that good cops existed and for inspiring people to believe in justice again. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You tell your mom she's the brave one. It takes courage to speak up, and that's what makes a difference." But not everyone was as supportive. Within the department, Maya faced a growing divide. While some of her colleagues expressed their admiration and solidarity, others viewed her as a troublemaker who had jeopardized the department's reputation. The tension was palpable during her shifts, with whispered conversations cutting off when she entered the room and pointed glances following her down the halls. One day, as Maya was reviewing case files at her desk, Officer Bennett stopped by. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Detective Evans, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how everything went down that day. I should have spoken up sooner." Maya looked up, her expression softening. "You did the right thing in the end, Officer Bennett. That's what matters. But remember, silence in the face of wrongdoing only makes it worse. Don't be afraid to stand up next time, even if it's hard." Bennett nodded, her words sinking in. "I won't forget that," he promised before walking away. As the investigation into Stanton progressed, more stories began to surface. Former colleagues and community members came forward with allegations of similar behavior: abuse of power, unwarranted aggression, and a pattern of targeting minority residents. Stanton's defenders grew quieter as the evidence mounted, and it became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a troubling pattern. The climax of the fallout came during a public forum hosted by the mayor. The event was packed, with residents, officers, and media representatives filling every seat. Maya was invited to speak, though she hesitated at first. She wasn't someone who sought the spotlight, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But this wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone who had ever been mistreated or silenced. When Maya finally stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This isn't just my story," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is about all of us. It's about what kind of community we want to be and what kind of future we want to build. We can't let fear or complacency hold us back from doing what's right. Change is hard, but it's necessary. And it starts with accountability, for everyone." The room erupted into applause, a wave of support that filled Maya with renewed determination. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she also knew she wasn't alone. As the forum ended and people filed out, a reporter approached Maya, microphone in hand. "Detective Evans, what's next for you?" Maya paused, considering the question. Then, with a small, confident smile, she replied, "The work isn't done. It never is. But I'll keep fighting, because that's what justice demands." And with those words, she turned and walked away, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the public forum marked a turning point for the town. The police department, once a symbol of unchecked authority for many, was now under a microscope. Investigators from outside agencies had been brought in to ensure impartiality, and their findings were scathing. Officer Stanton's actions were confirmed as part of a broader pattern of misconduct, and he was formally terminated from the force. His case was forwarded to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. For Maya, the conclusion of Stanton's chapter was only the beginning. The town's residents, inspired by her courage, began to organize more fervently. Grassroots organizations formed to push for reforms in policing, creating a bridge between the community and the department. Maya found herself increasingly at the center of these efforts, though not always by choice. She became a reluctant symbol of accountability, her face and name frequently featured in news articles and online discussions. Some saw her as a hero, others as a troublemaker. But Maya's focus remained steady, ensuring that the momentum for change didn't fade once the headlines did. One evening, as Maya sat in her modest apartment reviewing a stack of policy proposals sent by community groups, her phone buzzed. It was Chief Mercer. She hesitated before answering, knowing that their recent interactions had been tense at best. "Detective Evans," Mercer began, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "I wanted to inform you that the department has decided to implement several of the recommendations proposed at the recent town hall meetings. Mandatory bias training, body cameras for all officers, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board are among the changes we're prioritizing." Maya felt a surge of cautious optimism. "That's a good start," she replied. "But it's just that, a start. Real change will take consistent effort." "I agree," Mercer said after a pause. "And I'd like your help to ensure these changes are effective. You've earned the trust of this community, Maya. They listen to you in ways they don't always listen to us. Will you join the oversight board as a liaison from the department?" The offer caught her off guard. Maya had never imagined herself in such a role, balancing her duties as a detective with the political and administrative challenges of reform work. But as she considered the weight of Mercer's words, she realized this was an opportunity to make a deeper impact. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But on one condition." "What's that?" Mercer asked. "I want to be involved in the hiring and training process for new officers," Maya said firmly. "If we're serious about change, we need to start from the ground up. That means bringing in people who understand what it means to serve this community and equipping them with the tools to do it right." Mercer agreed without hesitation. "Consider it done." The next day, Maya met with the newly formed oversight board for the first time. The group was diverse, made up of community leaders, activists, and even a few retired officers. Their discussions were heated but productive, each member bringing their unique perspective to the table. Maya quickly became a key figure in the group, her insights as both an officer and a victim of misconduct invaluable to their efforts. Outside of her official duties, Maya continued to connect with the community. She organized workshops at schools and community centers, educating young people about their rights and how to safely interact with law enforcement. She worked closely with local businesses to establish partnerships that would benefit the underserved areas of the town, creating job opportunities and funding for youth programs. But not everyone welcomed the changes. A vocal minority within the department resisted the reforms, viewing them as a threat to their authority. Maya frequently found herself the target of whispered criticism and outright hostility from certain colleagues. She even received anonymous notes in her locker, threatening messages laced with veiled racism and misogyny. Maya didn't let it deter her. Each insult, each threat, only fueled her determination to prove that integrity and justice could prevail. She leaned on her growing network of allies, both inside and outside the department, to push forward. One of the most significant moments came during a community outreach event hosted by the Oversight Board. Maya had invited Marcus, the young boy who had given her the heartfelt letter, to speak about his hopes for the future. Standing on a small stage in front of a packed audience, Marcus clutched the microphone tightly and took a deep breath. "My mom always says that people like Detective Evans are the reason we should never give up hope," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "She showed us that it's okay to stand up, even when it's scary. I think we can all be like her. We can all do something to make things better." The crowd erupted into applause, and Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized just how much her actions had meant to people like Marcus. It was a powerful reminder of why she had chosen this path, despite its challenges. As the months turned into a year, the changes Maya had fought for began to take root. The department's culture shifted, slowly but unmistakably, as new officers brought fresh perspectives and older ones adapted to the new expectations. The community, once divided by fear and mistrust, began to heal. It wasn't perfect, progress rarely is, but it was progress nonetheless. Maya often reflected on how far they had come. She knew the journey was far from over, but she also knew that each step forward brought them closer to a better, more just future. One evening, as she walked through the now bustling downtown streets, she spotted a mural painted on the side of a building. It depicted a young girl standing tall, her shadow stretching behind her in the shape of a powerful lion. Beneath it were the words, "Courage changes everything." Maya smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for hope, for Marcus, for his mother, for everyone who believed in a better tomorrow. And as long as she had the strength to stand, she would keep fighting. As time passed, the impact of the reforms rippled through the town, and Detective Maya Evans found herself navigating a new era for both the police department and the community. While progress was being made, the scars of the past lingered, and the weight of maintaining momentum rested heavily on her shoulders. Maya knew all too well that systemic change wasn't a destination, it was a continuous journey requiring vigilance, determination, and collaboration. The Civilian Oversight Board, which had started as a tentative experiment, had grown into a powerful force for accountability. Maya, as a liaison, became a trusted voice for both sides, bridging the often wide gap between officers and citizens. Meetings were no longer purely reactive, responding to incidents of misconduct; they became proactive, focused on preventing problems before they started. Maya advocated for programs that paired officers with community leaders to address specific neighborhood concerns, turning once hostile relationships into partnerships. But one night, a stark reminder of the work still ahead came crashing through the progress. Maya was awoken by a call from Chief Mercer. A protest had broken out at a construction site where plans for a new development were underway. The site, as Maya quickly learned, was in the heart of a historically black neighborhood, and the project threatened to displace dozens of families. The community had rallied to stop it, but the developers had called in private security, escalating tensions. By the time Maya arrived, the scene was chaotic. Protesters holding signs chanted in unison, their voices rising against the hum of police vehicles and private security guards stationed at the perimeter. Tensions boiled over as a confrontation erupted between the guards and protesters. Maya's heart sank as she saw officers caught in the middle, some clearly overwhelmed and unsure of how to handle the volatile situation. Stepping into the fray, Maya quickly assessed the scene. She spotted Marcus's mother, Erica, near the front of the protest, holding her ground against an aggressive guard. Maya pushed her way forward, her badge raised high as she shouted, "Stop! Everyone, stand down!" The crowd's energy simmered, though anger and frustration still hung heavy in the air. Maya addressed the officers first, reminding them of their duty to de-escalate. Then she turned to the private security team, her tone firm and authoritative. "You're on thin ice. Any further aggression, and you'll be answering to the full extent of the law." Finally, she faced the protesters. "I hear you," she said, her voice carrying above the murmurs. "But we need to handle this in a way that strengthens our cause, not weakens it. Violence and chaos won't solve this, unity and strategy will." Erica stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "They're trying to take everything, Maya. They're ignoring us because they think they can. How do we fight back without losing?" Maya took a deep breath. "We fight smart. We gather evidence, mobilize support, and make our voices impossible to ignore. But we do it together, and peacefully." In the days that followed, Maya helped the community organize a formal campaign against the development. She connected them with legal aid and activists experienced in land preservation and housing rights. Her role as a detective provided access to key documents, exposing shady practices by the developers that bolstered the community's case. The fight was long and grueling, but it galvanized the town in ways Maya hadn't seen before. At the same time, within the department, Maya continued to face resistance. A faction of officers viewed her as a traitor, someone more loyal to the community than her own colleagues. Rumors swirled that some were deliberately undermining her initiatives, and Maya found herself in a constant battle to maintain trust on all sides. One night, as she worked late in her office, she received an unexpected visitor, Officer Bennett. He looked uneasy, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside. "Detective," he began, closing the door behind him. "There's something you need to know." Bennett revealed that a small group of officers had been meeting secretly, discussing ways to discredit Maya and her reforms. They planned to leak sensitive information to the media, painting her as biased and unfit for her position. Maya's initial anger gave way to resolve. She thanked Bennett for his courage in coming forward and immediately took action. She reported the conspiracy to Chief Mercer, who launched an internal investigation. The fallout was swift, several officers were disciplined, and 2 were dismissed from the force. The incident sent a clear message: the old ways of silence and complicity were no longer tolerated. Despite the setback, Maya found strength in the support she received from the community and her allies within the department. Marcus and his mother, Erica, became regular visitors to her office, bringing her coffee and words of encouragement. The oversight board stood firmly by her side, publicly condemning the smear campaign and reaffirming their commitment to change. Months later, the battle over the construction site came to a head. The community's relentless efforts paid off when a judge issued an injunction halting the development. The decision was celebrated as a victory not just for the affected families but for the entire town. Maya attended the celebration, held in the neighborhood park, where Marcus once again took the stage. "We won because we didn't give up," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We fought for what's right, and we showed that when we stand together, we can make anything happen." As Maya listened, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but moments like this reminded her why she had chosen this path. In the quiet weeks that followed, Maya reflected on everything that had transpired. The town was far from perfect, but it was undeniably better than it had been a year ago. She had helped spark a movement, one that continued to grow and evolve with each passing day. One evening, as she walked through the now thriving downtown, Maya stopped by the mural she had seen months earlier. Someone had added to it, a new figure standing beside the young girl, their hands clasped together. Beneath it, a single word had been painted: unity. Maya smiled, her heart swelling with hope. The work wasn't over, it never would be, but she was ready for whatever came next. For herself, for Marcus, and for everyone who believed in a better future, she would keep fighting. Always.